Welcome to the Vintage Ballers podcast. I'm your host, Brad Coreno. And on today's episode, we have Scott Williams joining the show. Scott played for the legendary Dean Smith at North Carolina back in the late 80s before joining the Chicago Bulls and winning 3 championships with Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, and Phil Jackson. He went along and played 15 years in the NBA and is one of only 4 players to have played with both Michael Jordan and LeBron James. Scott also has a book out about his life called Through the Fire, in which he highlights childhood trauma and his basketball career. So without further ado, please welcome Scott Williams. Scott, first of all, I want to thank you for coming on the show and giving me time to interview you, because you're someone I told you last week I grew up watching as a kid. So, I have a pretty in-depth basketball background. And I remember at Carolina as a little boy, you being there with guys like Chili Pete and Hubert Davis and all those guys. I mean, I think you even played with Kenny Smith for a year or two. And
that's right. 1 year.
Yep. So I remember all those guys very well. And of course, going into those later 2000, you were already in the NBA, but George Lynch and Montrose and those guys winning the championship. So again, I have a lot of memories of you. And of course, with those Bulls runs, everyone I think everyone I've told that about you being on the show, my buddy Jay yesterday, I was at the Cavs Knicks game. And I said, hey, I go, Scott, I'm going to have Scott Williams on tomorrow. And he goes, the Scott Williams? I said, yeah. He goes, man, that's a pretty big get. I said, yeah, I'm lucky to have him. But you're a very well-known.
Put the in front of my name before, but I'm flattered.
Jay will be watching this, so shout out to Jay. But really, Scott, you were a part of a dynasty, and people don't forget those names. You were one of the key players of a dynasty that won 3 championships, and of course MJ and those guys. Scotty won 6. You were a part of one of the greatest, if not the greatest, dynasty of modern sports history. And, we'll get into that a little bit later in the show, but you're a name that people, again, I remember you and Stacey King, so many of those guys on that team. I'm vividly as a kid, Scott, I remember watching those games, those finals games against Clyde and against Magic and against, Chuck and all those guys. And I was like 9, 10 years old back in those days. So that was like everything to my generation, watching, you guys come up and win all those championships, even though I was a Clevelander and you broke my heart. But, we'll get into that too. But, my brother was funny because he was a huge MJ fan, Cleveland fan first, but after Cleveland lost, he would root for you guys because of MJ. And, and he was a basketball player himself. So it was fun to watch the game through his eyes and my dad's eyes. And I learned a lot about basketball watching you guys. So again, you're a name that I was familiar with since I was probably 5 years old.
Well, thank you. It's funny because my kids growing up didn't understand what all the hype was about when somebody would stop dad and want to talk hoops or ask for an autograph or a photo. They didn't get it because I had them so much later in my basketball career. I think I was in Phoenix in my 12th year, I think, when my son was born. So they didn't get all that hype of what the Bulls dynasty was all about. And I think really didn't quite even understand as they got older until Michael Jordan's Last Dance 10-part documentary came out during the pandemic. And then they kind of started seeing, how many people were watching that every Sunday night and glued to their TVs, especially because there was, other sports programming going on during the height of the pandemic there. And I think they started to pick up on it a little bit more now. And it's even to this day, it was a blessing to be in Chicago and playing with those professionals and good buddies of mine. Because not a day goes by, I don't think somebody doesn't stop me and say, hey, champ, or talk about that run, or they were Knicks fans, and how I broke their heart. I go, dude, it wasn't me, man. It was that black cat number 23 that did all the damage. And we were just kind of along to support him and sometimes just get out of his way and let him do his thing. But it was a special moment in my basketball career, certainly a special moment in my life.
Scott, not many people can say they even made the NBA, not to mention won a championship, not to mention won 3 with Michael Jordan.
No, I was, like I said, I was blessed. And I almost screwed it up though, Brad, because I had an interview, a tryout with Charlotte Hornets. And when I got down there, they failed me on my physical. And that afternoon I got on a plane and went to Chicago and to their summer league team. So I just thought with, being a North Carolina guy, Charlotte only in their second year in existence in 1990. They didn't come into more than a franchise till '88. So I played against J.R. Reed, and I knew some of those guys, Kenny Gaddison, and some of the bigs that they had on the roster. I could compete with these guys. This will be a good opportunity for me. But one of the reasons why I wasn't drafted to begin with was because of my shoulder. And they tested my shoulder and failed me on my physical. It was the biggest blessing they could have given me, because although it was difficult to try out and get the Bulls' final roster spot, it turned out to be one of those things where the system, the players all fit my game, the coach, all that style of defense, and a lot of guys on the offensive end being able to be interchangeable and in different parts allowed me to crack the rotation very quickly, because I was a very smart player. So it really changed the trajectory of my career. Had I made that Hornets ball club, I wouldn't have been with the professionals of John Paxson and Craig Hodges, Bill Cartwright, Michael Jordan. These guys taught me how to be pros. It's one thing to play in the NBA. It is another thing to be a professional. I write about it in my book, Always Be a Pro. ABP. And that type of know-how to how to work your way into the good graces of the organization, where you're active in the community. I'm proud that I won the Charles Lubin Award with the Chicago Bulls during my time there, which is given out to the player that serves the community the greatest. I was very active in all the media requests. I knew that was something that I wanted to get into, and I thought the more reps I got on TV and more comfortable I would be in front of the camera, learning about that side of the business. So I was always quick to volunteer for any events that were taking place. And you become an asset to an organization. I was on fumes my last year in the league in Cleveland. I mean, the only reason they brought me in there because I had gotten a reputation of helping young players and a glue in the locker room and getting guys to buy into a team concept. And I had done that with Stoudemire and with Hardaway and Marbury and Phoenix. Just shortly, the year or two before that, we weren't picked to make the playoffs, and we ended up taking the Spurs to a game 6. So that was a special time with guys that I played with there, and that led to my getting a deal in Cleveland with a young LeBron James. So I'm one of just a few players in the NBA that can say they played with probably two of the greats of the game all time. And I was quite blessed. I was out of gas, and they had this young kid named Anderson Varejao, who was I think an 18 or 19-year-old ball of energy, just hair, and he was running circles around me. And I think at one point in time I told the coach, "Hey, I'm older than LeBron's mom. I think that qualifies me for early pension. You can go ahead and send me home now."
Scott, it was 0405. I remember it very well. I was in college then. And I think Tractor Trailer was on that team too. Robert Trailer, I believe, for a little bit. Maybe the end of that, one of those seasons, first two.
I didn't overlap with Track. I missed him in Cleveland just by a little bit, but I did play with him in Milwaukee.
Okay. Yep. Track was on. And then, obviously Varejao, Big Z. I mean, all those guys. I think Jeff McGinnis was on that team. So yeah, that was going back, 0405, and LeBron. That was the last year LeBron didn't make the playoffs. He made the playoffs every other year in his career since then. That was his learning year for him.
Get that on my record now.
Scott,
I didn't realize that. Damn. But in my defense, we did qualify the A spot, but we lost the tiebreaker.
I remember that. It was right at the end of the year.
Washington. So
I remember that.
We were pretty darn close. And that was the year Silas got fired, and there was some change in ownership. So there was a lot of moving pieces there. But one thing I noticed right away is like LeBron had an it factor. Now I can't sit here and take credit for him going on to lead in the NBA all-time scorer. I didn't see that coming. I don't know if I'd been that good a general manager in the NBA. And I thought the kid Luka was going to be a bust. So shows you what I know about player perspectives. Even Giannis, I thought he was going to be good when I was coaching him his rookie year, but I didn't see multiple MVPs and bringing the first championship in 50 years to Milwaukee. So, but I enjoyed that role as I got older of helping younger guys. I did it with Stoudemire and Nazir Muhammad and Michael Redd and a host of other cats that I'd like to thank. Me in that locker room, passing on some of the knowledge that I got from the pros that I played with Chicago, that championship mentality and some of the other factors I talked about, I helped them go on to have long, prosperous careers.
I mean, you were 15 years. My buddy Jay was, I mean, I already knew your career pretty well just because I'm an NBA nut and I know all this stuff. But my buddy Jay emailed me this morning. He's like, check out his career. I mean, you played a long time. And I mean, you were a key player, a lot of those teams. I know your personality. I mean, I could just tell by talking to you. Obviously, in the locker room, that's a big deal to have someone like you who's a vet who can teach people certain things. So I think that goes a long way. And you know, I think you were one of only four who's ever played with both, you know, MJ and LeBron. And it'll forever be that way. So 4 players in NBA history, Scott. That's incredible if you think about that.
Well, I had like I said, I had a long career. I was very blessed. I had some injuries along the way, but nothing that was completely debilitating. So I felt fortunate from getting out without, tearing up my knees, 2 bad hips. I had some shoulder stuff. I had plenty of surgeries, but everything's that I could recover. I'm part of being a pro. But what you talk about having teammates that respect you for what you've accomplished, for how you handle yourself. That's important. But I never wanted to, like MJ, I never wanted to separate myself from my teammates just as I got older from the younger guys. Like Robert Traylor and Skip to Malou, Rafer Alston. I tried to do things on those Milwaukee Buck teams what those younger players did. Now, sometimes it was getting dragged to a strip club at 2:00 in the morning. I didn't really want to be there.
Hey, you gotta do your thing.
But you do some things sometimes that show that, hey, you're one of the fellas. And I was hurt the next day in practice, but I rallied. It's like, if you want to stay up all night with the Owls, you got to be able to soar with the Eagles during the day. And I think, going out there and showing that, lace them up, you're going to be the best player on practice is important. So I hope that taught those guys some young lessons about, every now and again, you can go out and you can tie it on, you can live that NBA lifestyle, and that's fun. And you can hit the clubs and stay out late night. But for the most part, it's a business. And if you're doing things that hurt your business by not being able to perform, the word will spread around the league about you, and you do not want that.
That's all great points right there. And I think we saw that with the young John Morant and some other people who are still learning. I think when you're a young kid, you give all that money, all that responsibility. I mean, he's the face of a franchise. I can't imagine being that age, having God knows how many millions and being the face of a franchise and a city, really, because they don't have any other pro teams in Memphis. So I think that, to me, I think there's a lot when it comes to the mindset, mental health aspect of pro sports and the NBA that people overlook, and they act like everyone's just a robot. You're going to go out there and, that's not how it is. People have real lives. I mean, we'll actually talk about what you went through, obviously, as a teenager. People go through real life stuff that really has an impact on the rest of their life, off the court, that is not always easy to handle when you're on it.
Well, 100%. And you brought up John Morant. There's been a number of other guys that have had to take some time off to deal with some mental health issues. And I'm glad that they're doing that. And I'm glad that the teams and the league now are helping players in those situations. When I was, 33 years ago starting out, I don't know if teams, coaches, staff, even other players would be so receptive to somebody having to deal with mental health issues. But there's a lot more knowledge around it. It was, back then, I think it was a sign of weakness if you couldn't handle some of the things that were going on outside of the basketball court and it was affecting you on the court. Now I think that, Steve Kerr has done a good job accepting, who's the player there? That's kid from Minnesota. Anyway, he's got a player on.
Andrew Wiggins.
Yeah. Thank you. Wiggins had to take some time away, and the team, it's his business. They haven't discussed what's going on with him, but they're supporting him. And I think that is so important to change the mindset of a lot of what front office or coaches or even the league offices might think, that the guys are getting some time now to take care of that and being welcomed back if they are ready to return.
And it's so important. I've struggled from anxiety and depression in my life. I mean, severe depression at times. So I know what it's like. And, I could put on that happy face and there's times in my life where people didn't know I was struggling, where everyone think, oh, it's Brad. I'm usually bubbly and fun and all that. And I could keep it a secret to a certain point. And then one summer years ago, I was so depressed, I couldn't keep it a secret anymore. And it affected every area of my life. I had to go back to therapy, and I'm not afraid to admit it. Here's all the things I did. And I think we need to talk about it more because, life is life. You're going to get thrown a lot of things your way. And I want to get into your story here in a second. You know, I lost my best friend to suicide when I was 19. So that taught me a lot about life right there. You know, I mean, I talked to him 3 hours before he did it, having no idea that he would do what he did. And then, you know, 3 hours later, we get a call that he's not here anymore. So to me, that changed my whole life, like my perception of life and how you have to enjoy people around you. You know, when you're 19, 20, you're in party mode. You know how it is when you're young, you're in a different mode and you're throwing something at that age that big, and you went through something even bigger. It really changes your whole perception of life. And I think unfortunately, it matures you at a young age that you probably shouldn't have to go through something like that, but you learn really quickly. And it also has a lot of negative effects as far as your psyche. And for me, it caused a lot of, you know, my own anxiety and depression, and just, you know, it did a lot for me, I guess, mental health wise, Scott. It just made me look at my whole life in a different way. And I went back to therapy back then when I was young, but I was too young. I was in party mode. I wasn't dealing with it the right way. So I left therapy. Years later, you know, and with other things that happened in my life, I finally went back, and now I'm in a much better spot. But mental health to me is very important. So I can't wait to get into your story. And I'm going to be reading your book, and I cannot wait to see everything you say, because again, you went through something that was unlike anything most people ever go through in their lives.
Yeah, and I'm sorry that you had to have dealt with that, and that trauma is real. And I think that a lot of people suffer in silence. I was that guy for some period of time. And for folks that don't know, when I was 19, there was a knock on my dorm room door, and I was riding high. It was the first day of practice. I was going to be that afternoon, and just been off a undefeated ACC campaign the year before my freshman year, and we were #1 team in the country. Everything was good. I'd worked my way solidly in the rotation. I was one of the first bigs off the bench, and I was looking forward to starting my sophomore year, as Joe Wolf and Dave Thompson had moved on and opened up the starting position for me. So things were going good for me. And there were some problems at home that I grew up with on house that was I had a lot of verbal and physical abuse. And my mother stayed in a relationship that was not good for her or me and my brother till we were safely out of the home. And when my father was away, and she and a girlfriend moved her out, but he found her and turned a gun on her and killed her and shot himself. And that's the news that Coach Smith had to deliver to me one morning at 7:30 in the morning. And I was 19 years old as well. And I think I was a young 19. So it was very hard for me to process. The trauma punches holes in your memory. I had a lot of memory loss from some childhood events and things that happened that week and subsequent days that followed. But I was very fortunate in one aspect, that I was at the University of North Carolina playing for a man like Coach Smith, who had promised my mother when I went away to school 3,000 miles away, as I was Coach Smith's first recruit west of the Mississippi, that he would take care of me and he would look out for me. And true to his word, when I wanted to sit out the year and return to California to be closer to some family, he said no. He wanted me close to him, and there was days and I was dead tired trying to lace my shoes up and get ready for a Coach Smith practice. I hadn't slept, or I had hit the beers or the bottle too hard the night before, trying to pass out so I wouldn't be thinking all those negative thoughts and being depressed in that dormitory room in the cold winter months. And thought Coach Smith might say, okay, why don't you sit this practice out? But he was quite the opposite. He worked me hard. And Coach Williams, Roy Williams, was an assistant coach. He got us 35 to 45 minutes before practice, and he'd wear JR and me and Pete Chilcutt and Marty Hensley. He was the big man's coach, so he'd wear us out, and Coach Smith get his hands on us, and he'd work us over too. But that time on the court became therapeutic for me. Banging with my teammates, being able to escape the reality of some of the drama in my life, and that having to lock into a Coach Smith practice plan and pick up what he was trying to implement in practice that day, being with my teammates was my source of therapy, because Dr. Linnea Smith, Coach Smith's wife, was a doctor of psychology, and she suggested I see a therapist for a period of time. And I did a couple sessions, But again, I was 19 years old and I felt uncomfortable sometimes talking to an older man that I did not know, I had no relationship with, wasn't really connected to the basketball program. So I stopped those. I thanked her and I thanked him, but therapy is a good thing. I just wasn't ready for it at the time. And like I say, my therapy was on the court or hanging with my teammates and grabbing a beer up on Franklin Street or a burger or catching a movie. They probably didn't know it, but they were a great support system for me at the time, and I really at a time that I really needed. So bad thing happened to me at the right place, I think is kind of how I like to make it. And I'm trying to turn that mess into a message. I'm 55 years old now, Brad, and I can't sit here and tell you that I got through all of this very, very quickly or very well. In fact, when I wrote this book, I had to put it down several times because it was very hard to relive those memories of, watching my mother, brother, and I, having to endure that type of verbal and physical abuse. And I'm pretty royal and I'm pretty raw about it. I talk quite openly about all the things that happened to me personally, things that I did that you're supposed to get over as a child. I still had as a senior. So, but I wanted people to understand that I'm no different than anybody else. And I didn't come from some inner city poor background or drugs or gangs. I was a upper middle class, 2-story house in the suburbs of LA with a pool and a jacuzzi in the backyard and 3-car garage and a 2-story home with sago palms guarding my mom's walkway. Boy, you better not mess with those sago palms when you're playing hoops in the driveway. I tell you that way. Rita Williams would flip her wig, but that was, everything that it looked like from the exterior. Is the interior that we were really dealing with. And I think she wanted me far away from Los Angeles because I'd always dreamt of going to UCLA. And I'll wrap it with this, but Coach Smith was very crafty. He was the only coach that invited my mother to come with me on my recruiting trip. So he did a good job. So kind of like the movie Air. I don't know if you've seen that yet. About the Nike and how they signed Michael Jordan. They got to.
I haven't seen that yet.
Oh, I don't want to ruin it for you, but they talked to his parents, and that was the end of getting Michael because he did not want to sign with Nike, but he was Sonny Vaccaro was very crafty. So that's what Dean Smith did, as well as my mother fell in love with that campus, and she knew that he cared more about me as an individual than he ever cared about winning a basketball game.
And I want to get into Coach Smith in a little bit here. And before we do, when you look back at your childhood, I know basketball wise, obviously you're very successful. You won a state championship in, was it 86? And,
That's right.
so
go Wildcats.
Yep. Was it Glenn A. Wilson High School?
Yeah. You do your homework. Yeah.
Oh, I do. And I remember looking all this up and thinking like, wow, like you to be that successful and to have to, and while at the same time going through all that trauma at home, how did you do that? Like, how did you manage that on the court? Was it the same thing, as far as just blocking it out and was basketball like a relief to you, or how did you handle that at such a young age?
Yeah, I think that probably was true, and probably didn't realize that time. But sports in general, baseball was my first love. I was a really good baseball player until I was about 12, 13. The game started to slow down for me. I kind of lost interest, and my strike zone got a little bigger too. Those turkeys started hitting that low outside corner on me. But I was a home run hitter, probably the best player on the field for a number of years because I played at 8. My brother was 3 years older than me, so I played all my sports against he and his friends. So it was easy to compete against guys my own age. The game was, they pitched slower, and my hand-eye coordination was much quicker and faster than some of the other guys. But basketball, I got good coaching from an early age, even going back to junior high school. My coach Hizatomi, they taught us the fundamentals of the game. My first the bitty ball coach, Butch Miner, same thing. Even my high school coach, Mike Lowe. So I was blessed for whatever reason, the right place, right time. Coaches that cared, coaches that worked us and drilled us. And you had to focus, you had to lock in on what they were teaching. So it was an escape, I guess, at an early age, even though I didn't quite realize it.
And during that time, did you know, because I went through a divorce when I was like 9. It was a pretty brutal divorce with my parents, not the kind of trauma you went through, but a different type of trauma. And I moved multiple times, different schools, was kind of made fun of and bullied as a new kid. So I know somewhat about childhood trauma and how it sticks with you for a lot. I still have a little bit of it with me. And I'm not blaming my parents or anybody else. I'm just saying there's certain things that stick with you in your psyche when you're 9, 10 years old. Did you know at that age, Scott, when you were going through some of the emotional and physical abuse, like that it was abnormal, or do you think that was everyone's going through that?
Oh no, I knew it was abnormal. Nobody that's supposed to love you treats you that way, physically or verbally. Um, and I think sometimes the verbal abuse is in a way worse than the physical abuse. It affects your mind in ways that kind of hard to put a tangible to it. My brother was much more a target of my father's from both aspects, but certainly the verbal abuse. I'd like to think he's like the last victim of my father. Unfortunately, even him moving to North Carolina at the start of my junior year, and me trying to help him. And I'm no health professional in any way, and unqualified to try to do that. Um, he's still wrestling with a lot of those abuses. So um, that side of it is tough, and that's the reason why I think I even 55 at 55, several decades later, and I've spoken with some domestic violence programs in Cleveland and here in Phoenix, and have chaired a fundraising drive, co-chaired rather, and this was the first time during the pandemic when I started doing these podcasts for The Last Dance and um, putting some things out on Facebook. Somebody asked me to write a biography that I had to get real and really go back and talk about those things. And I always thought that, no one's going to care about some old washed up ball player, right? But like you said, because of those teams being on that floor with Michael Jordan and that platform, that dynasty that was built there, I just still have a little bit of relevance. And Coach Smith always used to say, it's never too late to do the right thing. And I thought if this book can find its way into some young man or some young girl or a woman's possession, and it gets them to want to talk about their anxiety, their depression, their abusive situation with someone that is trusted in their orbit, because it's the shameful aspect of not reaching out for help or knowing where to reach out for help, for that matter. That you keep it quiet, you keep it hidden, and that's what we did as a family. We didn't want that getting out into the community, and so if this does, and like I say, I'm not going to say save a life. I'm not naive to think that, but if it can help change or alter somebody's life, that would be worth it. I know that far too much depression, suicide attempts or successful suicides, and at both high school and college level, these kids have to do with far more than even what I had to do with growing up at such a younger age, of cyberbullying and all the other social pressures on them today. So I would like this book to be able to help somebody, and that maybe that they feel like, hell, Scott Williams could do it. It did only average 2.5 points and 2 rebounds. It made it won a championship ring. So that they could accomplish their goals of getting an education, and that accomplish their dreams of whatever that might be, like mine of playing in the NBA.
Well, Scott, I do think it could change a life, and I think it could save a life, because when you look at your story, it's so unique in the sense that the basketball side, with playing with MJ, winning those championships, playing for Dean Smith, who's obviously an icon, and just all your basketball experiences combined with going through probably the most traumatic experience a teenager could ever go through, which is losing both of your parents in the worst way possible. That combination, nobody has that kind. That's a unique combination. And I think when people look at that, I do think it's something that people do idolize the Bulls dynasty, and they idolize, Dean Smith and MJ and those. So you're part of all that. You're part of that history. And I think when that attracts people to you, and then when they hear the trauma side of it, that's a personal thing that people think, wow, I went through that too. I went through emotional abuse. I went through physical abuse. Maybe not losing parents, but that abuse. A lot of people unfortunately go through that. I think almost everybody does to some degree, in some aspect of their life. So I think it's very
100%.
relatable.
Sorry, Brad, I didn't mean to cut you off there. 100% though, the statistics from the domestic violence center that I work with right in Chapel Hill called the Compass Center, where I had a fundraiser on Saturday, the 15th, and we did a lot of good science and autographs, books, the copies of this book for 3 hours, and proceeds from that went to the Compass Center. And the partners that I had that I'm very proud of, I can mention them, Chapel Hill Sportswear, they stepped up, provided the space, gave 10% of their merchandise sales to the Compass Center as well. So, raising awareness, because one out of every, excuse me, I take that back. 20 people every minute are affected in some way by either verbal or physical abuse. And that's just far too great a number. And I had a chance to take 20 copies of my book and drop them off at the Carolina women's basketball office. And because one out of every 3 women will know or be themselves affected by domestic violence. And that percentage is far too high. So if somebody thinks that, well, now maybe they know that there's a resource right there on campus, right off of Franklin Street, that they can go get further information about how to step in and maybe talk to somebody that might be in a situation. It doesn't have to be marriage all the time. Sometimes it's just dating nowadays, that they find themselves in an abusive relationships, whether it's physical or verbally abusive. I think there's so many people that try to dominate somebody with verbal usage, and that's just not acceptable. So, raising some awareness, raising some funds, and hopefully doing some good. And last Saturday, we were able to accomplish that. And I was nervous as all get out doing it, because it's something I'd never done before. Basketball, you can put me on a 92 court, down 15 in game 6 with 4 of my bench buddies and Scottie Pippen. And I'm like, let's go. Like, no problem, no hesitation whatsoever. But, then Friday night, man, I was a ball of rats. I couldn't sleep. I barely got, I'm a big man, I eat a lot. I barely was able to eat 2 eggs. My palms were sweaty. Not thinking, I got 10 people, 12 people might show up in 2 hours. And to go for 3 hours straight, never getting a break, was pretty impressive. So a big shout out to the community of Chapel Hill and the state of North Carolina. I had people that told me they drove 3.5, 4 hours away to come down and to support our efforts there. And that meant just so much to me.
That's amazing. It really is. And I think in this day and age, you spoke earlier about how 33 years ago when you started in the NBA, talking about mental health is kind of taboo. You just didn't do it. Nowadays, especially with the younger generation, Scott, they're much more open to talk about things. I mean, my nephews are much more open than we were as teenagers to talk about that kind of stuff. And I think it's a huge advantage moving forward. And that's why your book is the perfect timing for this, because this is the time that it's changing. I think the dynamic is changing. I know there's still a lot of craziness out there, but the dynamic is certainly changing in the sense that people are more willing to talk about it. And it's not as taboo as it was even 10, 15, 20 years ago, not to mention 30 or 40. So to me, your book is coming out at the ideal time.
So glad to hear that. I had a chance meeting with someone that is co-chairing the fundraising for the Carolina Parents Council. I didn't even know it was a Carolina Parents Council, and getting with them and trying to figure out some ways that I may be able to come in and speak to some groups and get involved more. So it's funny that writing this kind of just to tell some stories has turned into a platform to try to do some good, and that we can reach some kids before they that, because that depression is tough, man. You get some really bad thoughts. You don't think you're worthy. You don't think you're good enough. And I've been there. I've been in that dorm room, and like I said, I've hit the beers too hard, and you would have thought, playing in University of North Carolina basketball, probably what could be rough, and these types of things come from all different outside factors. So it's nice to know that some of these younger kids are realizing that they can seek help.
Yep, there's no doubt about it. And when I went through the worst depression I went through years ago, Scott, I could barely get out of bed every morning. I mean, it was a struggle to get out of bed, and people who've never been through it don't understand all the time. They think, well, just get up. It's not, it's not that easy. I mean, all the thoughts racing through my head all day. And you said that, I had a lot of dark, negative thoughts, and it took me months to get out of that. And I went back to therapy. I did a lot of things for myself that helped, of course, improving diet, and there's all types of ways to help yourself. But when you're going through it, it seems like it's never going to end.
Yeah. And I think that's why getting help is important. I think, like I said, we talk. I don't want to keep talking around in circles, but um, back in the day, it was a sign of weakness, and that's no longer the case. So anybody that's listening out there that maybe struggling a little bit, it's not a sign of weakness. Everybody struggles at some point in time in their life. Athletes to entertainers, politicians to musicians. So um, seek some help, and there's resources that are available.
Scott, I think it's a sign of courage and strength to come out and talk about it. I really do. I mean, it takes a lot to talk about it. So I find it to be the exact opposite of how people used to perceive it. And I commend anybody that can come out and talk about it. And I'm very open about my struggles, and I feel like a lot of my friends, when I put a blog out on Facebook probably 8 or 9 years ago, Scott, about my depression and anxiety issues, I was terrified before I hit send, terrified. I wrote a blog and I'm like, you know what? I just want to tell everybody, I don't care. I'm going to, Scott, I was like you, sweaty palms. Like, God, people
Yeah,
gonna look at me differently?
Brad, I'm not laughing at because you had those. I'm laughing because that was me. That I wrote this book, had it done, and said, "Oh hell no, I am not putting this out into the Twitter universe for all these trolls to start come on and talk about me. 18 years old, sleeping in a twin bed, legs egg hanging off, and a pool of pee because I couldn't control my bladder at night, and I couldn't figure out why." And I just said, well, I'll just put it in a safe deposit box and, give the key to your kids when you pass on one day, they let them read it, and I was this close. So I know exactly what it is that you're speaking of. And that's the only reason why I chuckle, because I almost said, no, forget it. I ain't gonna do it. I don't want to do it that bad. And then I remembered the sacrifices that my mother made for me. And she made me to be no punk, no wimp. And I can handle anybody with a keyboard sitting down someplace that wants to talk a little trash on Twitter. And the lessons that Coach Smith taught me about toughness and doing something that is the right thing to do. So I'm glad that I got to this place where the book is out there.
Well, and I think anybody who's going to talk trash to you about that, I mean, that tells you all about that person right away. If they're gonna, bash you for your story, that's insane to me. I know there's people like that, unfortunately, but
Yeah,
that says a lot about them. Number one. Number two, when I sent that blog out, Scott, I immediately had like 25 hits, private messages from friends, family some acquaintances I don't talk to as much, who said, I have the same struggles. I don't tell anybody about it. Thank you for sharing. It was incredible. And I thought, wow, that's when I knew like there's something to this. Like we got to talk about this more, because it was people I never would have expected. Like people that you would never think would talk about that kind of stuff. Were saying, hey, I struggle too.
Yeah, same. And some women that have messaged me as a result of me putting some of this on my social media as well, reached out in direct messages and told me about how hard that they were lucky to get out with their lives in bad situations. Or my old high school coach, who I thought was an old salty dog and an SOB some days in practice, how hard he used to work as to win that state championship. He reached out to me and shared some things with him that he had never told anybody before. And, that's the kind of impact that I'm glad I'm having. And it hasn't been a month yet. So I'm very excited about the possibilities of what could be.
I love it. I cannot wait to read it. And Scott, going back to your college playing days, what was it like playing for the legendary Dean Smith? Obviously, he's one of the greatest coaches of all time in any sport, and he's just so iconic. And I remember as a kid watching him and Coach K, and there's so many guys in the ACC. Like it was almost like you're watching these gods, like coaching the side. That's how Dean Smith was to me when I was a kid. What was it like actually playing for him, and what was his style? How did he communicate with you guys, and how did he push you?
Well, I'm glad you asked me that question, because I think as much has been written about Coach Smith, the one thing that no one really talks about enough is how competitive the man was, and how hard he pushed us to want for us to realize, because we were McDonald's All-Americans, there was more inside of us. And he wanted to push us so hard that whatever we would face in life, whatever obstacles, challenges that we would face in life, because we had been through a Dean Smith's training program or conditioning program or practice, that it was nothing that we couldn't handle. And that's kind of how I faced not being drafted. You know, the loss of my parents, having to push through those practices when I was dog tired, and realizing that I just needed an opportunity. And when I got that in Chicago, and even though I had to, go to summer league and then get invited to veterans camp and then try out against with 7 other dudes for, one spot, I was always confident that if I was prepared, good things were going to happen for me. And that's the biggest thing that Coach Smith gave not only guys that played in the NBA like me, but guys that went on to for all walks of life, whether they went on to secondary education, became doctors or financial markets, general managers. We always had a sense of confidence in our ability because we know how to put together a game plan, go about executing that game plan for a goal. And that has served me well as in business and as a parent. So that part of what Coach Smith left us with, and he left us with a lot of sayings like the one I told you earlier. But what he gave us to prepare us for life after basketball and life after Chapel Hill was huge.
And basketball wise, when you look back at your favorite moments in that era, give us 1 or 2 that stick out to you.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Basketball wise at UNC, when you look back at that era, give us 1 or 2 moments that stick out to you.
Well, that beating that 4-letter school that was about 7 miles down the road that we had a huge rivalry with when they were number 1 in the nation and undefeated. And we were considered to be having a down year at 13th, right? So we had lost a couple close ball games and had to go in there without our starting point guard. And no one gave us a chance. I'm not even sure the UNC faithful, Tar Heel Nation, really thought we were going to go in there and get that victory. And we smacked them in the mouth and won by 20, beat them 91-71, gave Danny Ferry, who was going to be the national player of the year, and a young Christian Leitner, I believe, was on that squad too. He got a little bit of that. That was probably my proudest moment. The fans there aren't so nice. I think there's probably some Twitter trolls in that audience, some of the things they would say to me and J.R. Reed. But you having to lock in, having to focus, having to band with your brothers, the 14 guys to your right and to your left, and the coaching staff in a hostile environment. And that place, I don't know if you've ever been to Cameron Indoor Stadium. It holds about 10,000 people, but boy, they are right on top of the court. So it feels like it's twice as many. And they are loud and they're boisterous and rambunctious. So going back to Chapel Hill, short bus ride, like I said, it's only 7 miles. And seeing Franklin Street, which is the main party central, bonfire in the street, kids out celebrating the victory, and you're walking around slapping high fives and pounding a natty light. That was a special moment that I will never forget or be able to recreate. And the ACC tournament in '89, when they had smacked us in the mouth 3 times the previous year. The competitiveness that Coach Smith had us to get ready to prepare for that game, the energy in the locker room, the physicality of the game was a bloodbath. There was cheap shots taken, and I gave a few myself. So that was great. Those were probably the 2 special moments that I had. I hit some big shots. Against Virginia, I remember scoring 31 points, going 12 for 12, setting a Spets Center record at the time. But it was kind of those games against that 4-letter school that probably stand out the greatest in my mind. Hey, even to this day, I still kept my Carolina Blue Tar Heel Cup. This one is probably from the 80s too. This is not one of those ones I got a couple years back. But so special bonds with my teammates, my roommate Jeff Denny to this day, his parents, Herman and Sue, I write about in my book, how they were there for me, Angela and Lillian Lee, the culture and the family that Coach Smith created at that university was huge, and they all helped me. So I want to give them a lot of recognition for the love and support that they showed to me when I was going through such a very difficult time.
And you talked about that 4-letter, college down the road. I think I'm from Ohio, so we're huge Ohio State fans. I had a couple buddies that played for Ohio State football. And of course, Ohio State, Michigan, to me, I'm biased, but I think it's the greatest college football rivalry, just like I think UNC Duke is the greatest college basketball rivalry. What do you think about the college basketball aspect?
Yeah, college basketball. I don't think there's more of an intense rival. Just not only because both teams are so good every year, and the quality of play from both sides. Although I don't like any of those Duke players. Grant Hill might be about the only one that I've kind of eased up on a little bit, because our kids grew up together here. They were in the same class.
Okay, no kidding.
Out here in Phoenix, and we did a lot of play dates and stuff together. So I gotta say, he's not a bad dude. But the rest of them dudes over there, they ain't. Even to this day, I think if I saw Ala Abdenabi, I don't know quite how I might react to him. But yeah, anyway, the intensity, because the schools are so close. Michigan, Ohio State. I mean, you're separated by state lines. I don't know, was a couple hours probably.
Yeah, only like 3-4 hours. Yeah, it's not that far.
3-4 hour drive, but this is intense. Like I say, me and Grant having play dates with his daughter Milo and my son Ben. That's how it is in the community. You're playing your softball or biddy soccer or whatever. You went to North Carolina. They went to Duke, and everybody, the grocery store and supermarket and every place else. So the communities are so commingled that bragging rights are on the line with each Duke Carolina game for what could be a long period of time, depending on what time of the year it falls. So the whole community is invested in it, the whole state for that matter. So from the basketball side of things, that it's cool and it's intense, and it's what college basketball really, to me, was all about before all the NIL stuff. So we'll see how that will change things. I know we've got 6 guys in the portal right now. I'm sure Duke's probably got a few in the portal, with a lot of players bouncing around. We'll see if that still keeps that sort of intensity and that rivalry from year to year. But certainly when I was in school, and I know being back up on the Hill, it's still a real thing.
I mean, Scott, when I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and mostly for me, like the late 80s through the 90s, because I was born in 83, those UNC Duke games were just, I mean, I remember some of the teams, like, was it Leitner, Bobby Hurley, you said Grant Hill obviously was phenomenal, and all the way through the Jay Williams and Boozer. And then you got the UNC teams, which were I mean, you're talking Sheed and Vince Carter and Stackhouse and Ed Cota. I mean, go on and on. What an amazing, like, back then it was, I didn't miss a game back then. You had, Dickie V doing the games, and it was just awesome. You couldn't beat that. I mean, you could not beat that.
No, you really couldn't. And even when we were in the league, MJ, obviously everyone knows about him wearing his UNC shorts up underneath his Bulls game jersey. But that stuff was real. I mean, we talked trash to other dudes around the ACC after we done kicked their butt. So I'm watching those guys and following along. And when we beat Michigan, did you a favor there. In the 93, when they had the Fab Five, man, we were pumping our chest out, because I don't think a lot of guys, they were so hyped up. A lot of people didn't give us a much of a chance in that game, but Montross and George Lynch and some of those other dudes, I mean, they rose to the occasion, and we were all proud Tar Heels in the league. It doesn't matter if you were older guys like James Worthy and Bobby Jones and Mitch Kupchak. I remember going to Laker games, those guys stopping me from going behind the bench. I'm sneaking down, trying to get close to the court. I got tickets down there. I'm up at the 200 level. I'm trying to sneak down and hear Worthy turn around. Pat Riley's trying to draw up plays. I'm like, you gonna get me kicked out of here, man? Pay attention to the coach. But they wanted to say, hey, what's up, Carolina? Just a quick hello, and it just meant a lot. I got James Worthy. I'm just still young punk in high school. I just barely, won a state championship. He's got NBA rings on his fingers. So it's a cool thing, and you try to pass that down, along. I know Cam Johnson was here in the Phoenix Suns. I try to get down in court and say hello to him and things of that nature. When you run across guys across the league, you always want to say something to them. So we love that our Carolina family. We think the bond is strong. I had Pete Chilcutt show up at my book signing to help, drive sales. He signed autographs. He took pictures. He answered questions for the people that were waiting in line, which took some pressure off me. My old high school teammate and Jeff Denny doing the same thing, almost throwing people into the shop to go buy some merch to try to raise some money. And Michael Norwood, guy I only played 1 year with, right? So he's working with a university. He stopped by. So that means a lot when guys step up and support you in those types of situations.
Oh yeah, I mean that's huge, and I think the fact that says a lot about you too that they would do that for you. I mean that tells you a lot about what they think of you.
Yeah, the bond is strong, and one of the things like I said, I barely knew how to spell author when I started writing this book, and um, know even less about marketing the thing. And I know Danny Green has a very popular podcast called Inside the Green Room, and I didn't know how to get in touch with him. I asked somebody inside Carolina, did a pod. He said, "Would you mind, give me a number? Maybe I'll reach out to him." And I was nervous. And here I go asking some dude that I never even met, even though he's Carolina family. And I just fired him off a text and said, "Hey, this is what I'm trying to do and who I'm trying to help." And 3 hours later, I'm sitting on his pod doing this just like I'm doing with you. And I thought that was pretty damn cool and pretty proud, pretty damn real about what it means to be part of putting on that baby blue and white uniform at the University of North Carolina.
Yeah, I just saw Dan. I was down at the Cavs game yesterday. Danny hit a big three. Came in. They gave him some playing time because he was kind of the older vet that we got about 2 months ago, and they put him in. He hit a big three. The crowd went crazy because we love Danny because we drafted him back 13 years ago. So we love him, and we had a big three. It was awesome. So yeah, it was funny. I just saw I was just down there watching him. Not even 20 hours ago. So shout out to.
I'm pulling for the Cavs too. The brotherhood that one for all for one, and especially Danny. Spider Mitchell's quite a player. The Mobley kid. What's the kid with the big afro? Allen.
Oh, Jared Allen, Darius Garland, and they got some players.
The Cavs play great defense too. So and I'm a big proponent, believer rather, that defense and rebounding goes extremely far in the playoffs. So I'm definitely pulling for the Cavs. It's funny. I think I always kid people. I played for 7 teams. I probably easier to list the teams I didn't play for sometimes than the ones that I did. But 6 of the 7 teams that I played for all had a shot at making either the buy-in or the play-in and or in the playoffs. I think the Bulls missed it by 1 game, or and the Mavs, I think they threw one towards the end there.
Yeah, that was sketchy.
Mark Cuban got a big a fine for it, but it was really weird to have so many of my former teams in the postseason this year. Milwaukee, I don't know what they're going to do without Anthony.
I don't know, without Giannis.
A little nervous about that because he's my son's favorite player, and he was so gracious when he came through here to Phoenix. We went down and watched him, got some courtside action before the game started, and he gave my son a pair of basketball sneakers. Still remembers his old coach from his rookie year, which was a pretty damn cool thing.
He's incredible, Giannis. He really is. Like what an athlete, and coming into the league with really just a raw athlete. Wasn't really extremely skilled basketball wise when I watched him back in the and then now he's he's unbelievable.
You're telling me I had him as a rookie. I was like, dude, if you would have had these muscles and all this talent, we wouldn't have got fired that year. Maybe we would have won more than 15 games. They swept us out of there quick, fast, in a hurry.
Well, back then and the Cavs had the number 1 pick. We picked Anthony Bennett, and I'm not going to down Anthony. I know the kid had I'm not sure exactly what happened there, but the thing that Giannis was sitting there and looking back, it's like, oh, we could have had Giannis and LeBron on the same team if they, but no one knew, one knew Giannis was going to be like that. Obviously, that was just a completely random. But the NBA. There's so many stories we could talk about. But yesterday, that Cavs win yesterday, Scott, was the first non-LeBron playoff win in 25 years.
Wow. Okay.
For the Cavaliers. Yeah, it was
almost back to what I was playing against them in the Bulls uniform. So
just going back to 98.
I think we closed down Richfield Coliseum. That was after Richfield Coliseum, I guess.
After this was like
it's still a long time ago. So I know Dan Gilbert's smiling bright today.
Oh yeah, and that was like the Sean Kemp, Brevin Knight, Derek. I actually had Cedric Henderson on the podcast. He was on that team. So yeah, that was those days, and that was the last non-LeBron playoff win in Cleveland. It's incredible. So we were pretty happy that we finally lifted that, because that was kind of like the running joke is, oh, you guys can't win without LeBron. Well, now we finally got a playoff caliber team again, and of course LeBron was just so incredible. Having him here for 11 years was amazing. But going back now, Scott, to your Bulls days, and when you were obviously you eventually signed with them. With you and MJ, for example, like did having that UNC connection help you form like a relationship with MJ, or how did that go about?
Yes, to answer the question. And I don't want to give away everything in the book, but I had a chance meeting shortly after I wasn't drafted, MJ's buddy Fred Whitfield, who works with him now down in Charlotte, had a game for a camp that he put on for athletes unlimited. It was underprivileged kids that can't really afford to go to camp, so the camp was paid for. And they would put on a camp and MJ, or a game for the campers, and MJ would invite a lot of his pro buddies from the Bulls, and some guys down in Charlotte would drive up, and it was game took place in Greensboro, so it's only an hour from Chapel Hill. So my old teammate Jeff Denny, he told me about the game. I said, well, if I'm going to play against NBA guys, I need to get invited into that game. So I expressed an interest to play, and MJ said, come on, and put me on his team. And I was fortunate because it wasn't like the all-star games that you see on TV today. This is, still in 1990. MJ addressed us all in the locker room and said, hey, we're here to play a real basketball game. If you don't want to do that, there's the door, you can leave. And I was kind of looking around like, you serious? I just finished barnstorming against, old, fat, out of shape high school teachers and whatnot. So I was like, this is perfect because this is what I need. My style of play is more aggressive, more physical. And I played, J.R. Reed played, and I got a chance to bang with him again, and Kitty Gaddison, and Charles Oakley was there. And I would say I dominated, but I played well. And I didn't get pushed around. I held my own. And as MJ's leaving the game with Fred, he calls Jerry Krause, the general manager of the Chicago Bulls, and so I think we should give Williams a look-see. So yes, being in North Carolina, playing there gave me some opportunity to get in that game, get in front of Jordan, and gave me an opportunity to get invited to their summer league roster. So definitely did. And when I was in Chicago, I had a couple guys that like to give you the rookie treatment. I was the only rookie on the team, and when Horace and Scotty were my main culprits rather. He kind of give him a little look-see, like, all right, back off the rookie a little bit, because I'm trying to rack balls and clean the video room. I like to leave their trash and sprinkle the potato chip crumbs down. So he looked out for me that way. But the most important thing that he did for me was take me after practice. When practice was over our second year, and I was kind of getting in the rotation, but I definitely needed more reps. We play one-on-one, and it would just be down on the blocks from like the second block and in. You couldn't shoot outside 15 feet. And he worked on his low post game, and I got to play probably most one-on-one with Michael Jordan than up until his brothers had played against him after practice. So when you're watching him from those highlights anyway, when he's backing people down with that back, not just back, just leaning back, that is what he did to me. And just to loosen me up, because I jam him physically so hard and want to body him because I couldn't match his speed. I'd have to try to beat him with power. And that was how he would create some space. And then he would just, either explode up and over and through me, even when I was trying to, I'm going to say hurt him, but I was playing physical. I'm trying to get a win. I'm a competitor too. And I could never beat that sucker. So I figured if I beat him up long enough or hard enough, eventually I'd finally get a win. I hit one shot. That was a game winner. And the sucker said I traveled, man. And it's Michael Jordan. What are you gonna do? He says, my ball. I go, no, you gotta give MJ the ball, right? So even though I had up 3 points, he comes back and polishes me off. But I'm gonna hold on to that in my head that I got that
one. You got that one. It's funny. Like I had a couple guys in the podcast. One of them is named Willie Burton, played for the Heat. And he talks about trying to guard MJ, and they had some bigger guys, Steve Smith and Glenn Rice, and some taller, lankier guys. And they played you guys in the first round the one year. And he's like, man, he just talked about how MJ was just a different cat. And, some of the other guys that played against him said the same thing. Him and Akeem Olajuwon are always guys that people go back to how hard they were to guard, because Akeem's footwork obviously was unlike any other player we've seen at that position. And then MJ was MJ. And you just couldn't, you had to, there's really no weakness there. And if there was, it was very, very little. So you had to
No,
really pick your spots.
it was a supernatural ability. I mean, just God blessed him a little more than he blessed all the rest of us, and that even goes to the Hall of Famers. So it's not just the the guys that walked onto the league and just carved out a role playing career. I tell you, the greats of the greats. That top 30 Hall of Famers. And MJ and LeBron have something them other cats don't have, and I'm not trying to knock Magic Johnson or Wilt Chamberlain or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar or any of those greats of the greats, but I've watched a lot of basketball like you, and I've been around a lot of superstars: Steve Nash, Dirk Nowitzki, Tony Kukoc. I'm trying to name Ray Allen. I'm trying to name some of the Hall of Famers I played with, and Scottie Pippen. They don't have that, and it's not a slight on them. It's just something that they weren't blessed with by God. And the way they realize that and turn it on is pretty damn impressive to watch.
I mean, Scott, like when LeBron was so I grew up in Cleveland, obviously. We grew up 45 minutes from LeBron. My brother was a coach back then, a high school coach, and a guy named Bob Watson who ran camps up here called my brother and said, "You got to see this kid. He's like 14 at the time, this young kid named LeBron James." So he comes up here and he's like, I think LeBron was going into freshman year of high school, and he's playing against seniors in high school. And he said, "Brad, the first play of the game, some big senior goes up for a layup and LeBron blocks the shot and hits the top of the backboard." People are like, he's a little skinny, little 14-year-old kid. And after that, my brother, I'll never forget this. My friends still talk about it. My brother came to my house. He was living 4 hours away, and he came and he goes, "Brad, I just watched the next Michael Jordan as a 14-year-old kid." And we're all kind of like, "Oh yeah, really, right. Come on, And my brother's like, he's not a BS kind of guy. He's a real straight shooter. He goes, "No, this kid's the best. I've never seen anybody at that age play basketball like that." He goes, "He's going to be the next MJ." And so and sure enough, now he's not, MJ's still in his own stratosphere, in my opinion, but LeBron and Kobe to me are about the closest I've seen to that kind of, LeBron's incredible. And he surpassed to me all the expectations I think people had of him, especially all the pressure coming out of high school. So I think I have kind of a unique connection to MJ and LeBron in the sense that I grew up in Cleveland and watched MJ beat us for all those years, and it just, you guys, break our heart year after year. And then to have LeBron grow up in our backyard and watch him, I got to see MJ and LeBron probably more than the average person just because, it was Cleveland. So I saw what MJ was all about when I was a kid and, breaking my heart. And we couldn't even get past, the first round some of the time because of MJ. We had a great team back then, as you know. And, and then of course, LeBron doing what he did. Those are the two, those two and Kobe I've never seen anybody like those three. And I didn't get to watch Magic and Bird as much. I was too young then. But in my era, those three are beyond. And then, of course, to me, Dream, Olajuwon, I just think Dream was, I don't think he gets enough credit as far as just how talented he was. And I always wanted to ask you this, the Rockets, okay? 94 Rockets versus the 94 Bulls. If MJ stays, who wins that series?
We do.
I know.
MJ doesn't lose, dude. It's just it really is as simple as that. And I can talk about why the Pistons beat him, but yeah, that was still him trying to catch his stride and figuring out, what he needed to do to get past it. And once he figured it out, that was it. It was almost like when I used to play against my older brother. I couldn't beat him, even when I was better than him. It took me a minute to realize that it was mental. And after I beat him the first time, I told him, I said, "All those times I never got a victory, you never let me win a game. I will never let you win a game ever again." And he never beat me. And it got to the point where I started giving him beatdowns after that, and he just stopped playing me. He couldn't handle it. But that's what Michael had. And you might not win every game. Obviously it's a long season. You can win every game. But a playoff series, when I was there with that dude, the intensity, the focus, and the drive that he had, I knew we'd never lose a playoff series. I was so upset that I had signed to Philadelphia. No, if I'd have known that sucker was going to come back, midway through that year. So no doubt in my mind, heck, we almost got back to the NBA Finals without him. Scottie Pippen, a lot of people don't remember, had an MVP year. He came up third in the voting. I thought it could have been co-MVPs with Akeem, who had a monster year. I'm not trying to take anything away from Akeem. You talked about tough guards. I always tell people that Shaq was the strongest player that I ever played against, but Akeem was the hardest I ever had to guard. Like you said, all of the footwork, off the dribble, mid-range jump shots, the up and unders. It was impossible to stop him one-on-one. And A lot of people didn't like the double team because they saw so many other weapons around, and you were out there looking silly. Johnny Davis told me, "Yeah, your plan's working." We were up 12-10 at the first time out break. I'm like, dude, he's 5 for 5 on the field for me right now. He's killing me. Fans are booing. I can't stop this dude, right? So, but he'd make you look silly. All the different varieties of way he'd do it. Shaq just, he's coming right through your chest, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that. I mean, Scott, I can't disagree. MJ didn't lose. So, I mean, like, until if he would have lost a couple of finals, maybe we can have that debate. But 6-0, how can you debate that? So I agree. I would have picked the Bulls too. But I think that Rockets team, it would have been an interesting matchup just because I feel like the Bulls never necessarily faced, you guys didn't face like a dominant, center in all those runs. I mean, obviously Duckworth is a nice player, and some of the guys you play were okay.
Hold on now, you're not giving Patrick Ewing his due.
I'm talking. Oh, you're right. You're right. I'm talking about finals in the actual finals.
Well,
no, you're right.
And Brad Daugherty, for that matter. I think
you're right. No,
it was a very good center. Patrick was a very good center, and maybe you're not giving a guy that I want to say Dream may have been a little bit afraid of because he was so wild. Was my teammate Bill Cartwright. He was just such a wild defender, and he had these arms that were like fungo bats, man. They used to take out my teammates, Will Perdue and Stacey King, in practice all the time, and I'd laugh. They'd get their nose busted or get hit in the eyeball by one of Cartwright's flailing arms, and I would never get hit, and I'd laugh on him and say, "You guys just aren't fast enough. You got to be able to get out of the way. You got to anticipate that it's coming." And one day he cracked me right square in the middle of my head. And I think I was getting woozy before I even hit the court. Oh. And I remember my teammates, instead of, being concerned, they were laughing at me of all the times that I had talked trash about them for getting effed up out there on the floor. So, but Cartwright was a very good, serviceable defender that would give Akeem fits. And I don't remember if it was that year in 94, 95, but maybe 92 or 93, he had hit Akeem in the face and cracked his orbital bone. And I think a couple games after that, Akeem was a little leery, a little tentative when he had to go against Cartwright. So we might have had a mental edge against him too, although he was on a mission that year and leading the teams to those back-to-back championships. I want to have that conversation with my old teammate Pete Chilcutt one day.
I was gonna say, I talked to Pete, about with the old Rockets teams, but no, I think you're right, and I'm guessing I'm looking just at strictly the finals matchup, but you're right. Ewing obviously is a Hall of Famer, and I can't take any away from Big Pat and Brad Daugherty. When Brad Daugherty was healthy, he was a heck of a center. So no, you guys did face good centers. I guess in the finals, it would have been interesting to see the Dream with all those weapons like Ori and all the shooters, Kenny Smith and Vernon and all those guys, and Mario Ellie and Pete. And I mean, there were so many guys they had in that team that could shoot. It was basically a Dream and a bunch of shooters. So I would have been fun to see that matchup. But I think most people, if not everybody, would have taken the Bulls, obviously, in that series. But I think
even if the matchup was even an ultimate weapon, Phil Jackson, I'm not taking away anything from Rudy T. He always had us well prepared. But the experience factor. After we lost that first game to the Los Angeles Lakers on a home floor in 91, the team's confidence grew with a 30-point blowout the next night. When we were in finals games, it was nothing for us to go on the road to get victories. We did it, I think, in Portland. We won 2 out in Portland. We won 3 in Phoenix. We were a very good road team, and because of the experience that we had, that would have been a deciding factor as well. I don't think Houston would have been ready for that in their first year.
Well, that's a good point. That's all good points coming straight from a man who would know more than anybody else about it. So
a little biased too, maybe.
No, but you're. I mean, I can't argue anything you're saying. It all makes a lot of sense, and you actually were there. There's no one that I'm gonna. That's an argument that I'm not gonna try to have with someone who actually played in those games and saw what you saw. I wouldn't know that. So that I
love those teams. We were very close knit. I love playing with my teammates and in the city of Chicago. I write in my book, it was one of the hardest things I had to do was to leave Chicago, because it's a city not only gave me my opportunity, but I was immersed in that city. I was the first player to live downtown when the Bulls told me not to. Oh, you'll be late for this, you'll be late for that, and I made it work. I liked being down around. I considered, MJ the star of the team, but I was the star of the downtown nightlife anyway. Let me tell you that.
And when you look back, Scott, because I had one of your teammates, Dennis Hobson, who was on the 91 championship team. I had him on the show, and he's a great guy. We talked about some things, but looking back at that first championship to the third, how did you see the progression of MJ, Scotty, all of you guys, like from not really knowing how to win because you hadn't won yet to end up, a dynasty within 3 years? Take us through that progression.
Well, confidence, I think, was huge. But Michael, I'm not going to speak anymore on him. I'll take this opportunity to talk about Pippen, because I don't think Pippen gets the credit he deserves. He was a great player in those 91 and 92 championship teams, but his game went to a different level after he played on the Dream Team with all those stars. He came back in the 93 season and going forward, obviously, to win 4 more championships. A different player. I thought he saw that he could compete with the Larry Birds and the Magic Johnsons, the Clyde Drexlers daily in practice, and how they handled themselves, how they approached things. One thing to watch Michael, but it's another thing to watch those collective. I'm not talking about that kid that played at Duke. That was what they put on the team. But those other guys, how they approached everything. It made him such a better player, such a more confident player, and his game really elevated from being a good NBA All-Star to being a Hall of Famer.
Scotty, to me, is one of the most underrated players. I know he gets pressed because of the championships, but he's still underrated to me. Like, I watched him back, he could do everything. And I remember watching him guard Magic 94 feet in the 91 finals. And I was a little kid then. I remember my brother telling me why he's guarding Magic, the greatest point guard of all time, and really kind of giving their offense fits, when he started doing that. To me, that kind of changed the series. What do you think about that?
100%. I mean, I think that was the brilliance of Coach Jackson, throwing different looks at opponents. And obviously, you got this long 6'7" athletic player just turning. Like you say, I grew up watching Magic Johnson, so I consider him the greatest point guard ever. But slowing down their offensive attack. They still, like the Lakers, they weren't Showtime anymore, but they still like to get out and run. And we could play both styles. Physical, we had to play against the Knicks and the Pistons and in the Cavs. But we also could adapt to that Western Coast style that the Blazers and the Lakers like to play, the Suns. And all of a sudden, you got this guy who's checking you 80 feet away from the basket. And then Michael Jordan, with a run and jump, or me doing Stacey doing Laker Reds, providing, an extra half a man, and then trying to recover to our guys as they were slower, trying to get down the floor. So he was Johnny Bonk, who was the defensive guru, as much credit as Tex Winter gets for the offense. Maybe Johnny gets probably the least amount for the defense of turning Scotty and Michael. He called them his 2 Dobermans, but they really were. They attacked ball handlers with a ferocity I don't know if this league has ever seen out of 2 players before on the floor.
I mean, it's a great point. And it wasn't just, again, Scotty and MJ were all-time defenders. That's what people forget. It wasn't just the offensive brilliance of MJ. They both were all-time defenders, 2 of the greatest defenders of all time.
I believe Michael Jordan, you'd have to check this, or you may know this, won a Defensive Player of the Year award.
He did. Yeah. I mean, incredible.
Yeah.
Like, just that's insane for a guy of his offensive caliber to do that in the defensive side. You just don't see that very often.
No, and I'm gonna tell you, well, he didn't pass the ball. He did, but that wasn't what he was supposed to do, right? So I remember getting several assists from him when the ball nearly hit me in the mouth, because I just didn't see how he fit it through the tiny little cracks that he did. So he had great court vision, he had great awareness and passing abilities. So I could talk about my time there. I didn't want to leave. I think the biggest thing I got disappointed with, and I was probably a little young, I had chips on my shoulders still for not being drafted and always having to sign 1-year non-guaranteed contracts. And I'd played myself into the rotation. I'd played 46 minutes in a triple overtime game, and game 3 in the 93 finals. I'd played some big minutes in games 1 and 2, and we got wins out in Phoenix. And I was on that floor in game 6 when we came from 15 down. I was the only bench guy to play all 12 minutes. So when Phil Jackson in my exit interview told me that he didn't know what kind of player I was, it really hurt me. And I was given another opportunity to sign another 1-year deal. And guys that were playing behind me were signed 4- and 5-year extensions and contracts. And I said, well, I don't know what I got to do to prove it here. Apparently, whatever I do is not going to be enough. I thought I had done what I needed to do, not only in the regular season, but when it was, nut cutting time, when everyone had pushed all their chips into the middle of the table. But if I didn't know MJ was coming back, I would have let all that go, and I would have stayed, because not only was it great to win championships, it was great to be in a team environment with the star on the basketball court, cared more about winning the game than he cared about getting his numbers. And it just ain't like that other places in the NBA. And I talk a little bit about my time in Philadelphia with Allen Iverson, would have been miserable experience that was, where a guy really just cared about his star power and the team second. And it was just so evident to the way he approached the games, the practice, the community. And I just did not enjoy that at all. Basketball to me was supposed to be a team game where nobody was bigger than the team. And I had a taste of that in Chicago with the greatest player of all time. Even in LeBron, you don't hear guys that play with LeBron knocking him for caring more about himself than the team. Yeah, maybe there's a couple of goals that he might have gone after here in the last little bit when some of the Lakers squads weren't as good, chasing down that scoring title. But for, what was this, 20-year career, 20-year career, he's been doing it with excellence with the team goal in mind.
I mean, Scott, all that is such great points. And when you look back at the championships, when you won that first championship, what was that feeling like?
It was wonderful. I had to go through a lot to get there. I remember that we won in Los Angeles, place I grew up watching the Lakers.
Oh, I never thought of that.
Sneaking to the games, and a shared dream of my mother winning the NBA championship for the Lakers, but if you got to beat them for one, the same thing. But not having her there to share that moment with me, I cried hard. It was so much I'd been through. My shoulder had not been repaired. It used to sublex and dislocate in games or in practices. I remember come out sometimes in practice and my teammates would recognize me. Will Perdue would jump up and say, "Come on, Williams, get out of there." And I'd live my tears in my eyes. I'm trying to slip that thing back in, a Horace Grant doing that. And that meant the world to me, to those guys that would do that. So the coaches wouldn't know, or so they wouldn't cut me. Just, contracts weren't guaranteed till January 10th, and I always had that date circled on my calendar. So they do that, or my contract was laden with so many different performance bonuses. It was hard to even keep track of. I'm on the plane calculating these things, and I tell Will, "Hey, we're at the free throw line, Brian, and the rebound comes off. You let me grab it. I'm gonna buy you the biggest steak on our next road trip that you want, because I got six figures riding on these next few days. And when you're only making six figures, it's a lot of damn money back in the day. So, they were always cool, but like, "Okay, I got you, Scott. I got you." They were like, "Hey, get that tank." I was like, "Okay." But those were my brothers, and I enjoyed my time there. Leaving Chicago was hard, and I write some about that, my frustrations and having to deal with some things with Jerry Krause was kind of vilified in The Last Dance by Scotty and Michael, and we all had our issues with him, and I had a kind of a bittersweet relationship with him, because in a way he gave me my first opportunity to make it into the league. But boy, he used to make me jump through some hoops, as though that the things that I was providing for the team weren't sufficient to justify me getting an opportunity to stay a member of the ball club. And that was frustrating. Plus, he had said some things negatively about me to Coach Smith that were untrue. And he never apologized. And I've confronted him about that. And he never apologized to me about that. And I'm not going to kick a man who's no longer with us. And I don't write about that in the book, but it was sad, because you don't talk bad about me to Coach Smith. One thing I'd never want to do would be do anything to embarrass him. And anything you had to say to him, you could have came to me with first, and we could have straightened it out.
Did Coach Smith ever bring anything up to you, or did you talk to him about it?
Coach Smith's the one that told. He's the only one who told me.
Okay.
That's how I found out. He said, "I know it's not true," and I told Jerry Krause this, and the next day, I got to practice about 6 o'clock in the morning, waiting for Jerry to show up. I was ready to wring his fat little neck, but that's the kind of man Coach Smith was. He knew who I was, what I stood for. The things that Jerry was saying weren't true, founded on no evidence whatsoever. I don't know if Jerry did that because he got bad information, if he was trying to hurt my possibility of free agency coming up and wanted a rumor to spread around the league. I don't know what his motive was for it, but a simple apology was all he needed to do to me. And I'm easy. I can forget things extremely fast. And we would have moved on. He never would have had me saying a bad word about him. But yeah, he had a little bit of a complex that they talked about, that he didn't get enough credit for what the team was trying to had achieved for assembling all the pieces, and it worked against him ultimately in the end.
And Scott, one last basketball related question to that whole era, and there were so many iconic moments in those 3 finals that we could talk about, obviously a lot of MJ related stuff and all, Scotty guarding Magic 94 feet and, and it's those series, like especially the Blazers and that Sun series was a really fun one. Cause I mean, that was kind of you guys won all the road games, but then they beat you 2 out of 3 in Chicago. And I remember Barkley saying, we saw those signs outside saying champions, we're not going to let them win here. And it was a really fun series to watch. I guess like during those 3 series, when you look back, which team gave you the toughest, which team played you the toughest out of those 3?
Well, the Lakers are banged up, unfortunately. James Worthy and Byron Scott, the 2 starters on those championship runs that they had, couldn't perform. In fact, I think they both missed time in the series. They had a young Vlade Divac who had some good moments. Eldon Campbell off the bench had some good moments. Tony Campbell, but they weren't nearly talented enough with just Magic Johnson going up against both Pippen and Jordan to give us enough fits. And like I say, we pretty much swept them after they beat us by 1 point at home. So that happened pretty quickly. The team I think that probably gave us the most fits didn't even happen in the finals. It was probably those New York Knicks teams. They were very physical. They were well coached by Pat Riley. I think they had a great center in Patrick Ewing, who I don't believe gets enough credit for the way he played because he didn't win a championship. But that they were built for a style of play that was physical, with Ewing, Oakley, Charles Smith in the starting group. We brought in Anthony Mason there as a big, strong guy, Xavier McDaniels, smart point guard, and Doc Rivers, feisty little 2-guard, and John Starks, who I still like to give him an elbow once, twice too. And a number of other guys that they had. I'm forgetting some dudes that were pivotal on those teams, of course. But
Doc Rivers, Hubert Davis,
Trent Tucker was
Trent Tucker. Yep.
Oh yeah. So I thought that they were the team that nearly kept us from achieving that dynasty type status. The way they pushed us.
I mean, Scott, like those Knicks teams, you're right. They don't get credit. And you guys, because of you guys, a lot of stars in that era didn't get Reggie Miller, Patrick Ewing. You can go on John Stockton, Karl Malone, Charles Barkley. A lot of guys didn't get a ring because of you guys.
Because of Michael.
Yeah, because of Michael. Well, but
I like to say it was because of us, but again, like those Knicks fans get on me when I go back to New York City with my kids and walking around at Christmas trying to enjoy myself, and I'm getting these glares and these looks, and I know they're hoops fans. I'm like, dude, it wasn't me. Relax. I just want a carriage ride around the park, like leave me alone. But yeah, MJ was fantastic, and I great teammate, never separated himself. He'd play cards in the back and then come up and play cards with us in the front. We were playing small money games with BJ and Stacy and I, Will Purdue, playing blackjack, and he'd grab the cards and say, "I'll be the bank, bet whatever makes you uncomfortable." Like, nah, dude, I'll play my little $10 a hand. That's all I'll make here. When you're making $6,000 a month, that's all you can afford. So but anyway, yeah, it was a lot of fun to be around those dudes, and I wish we had a 30-year reunion this year for our three-peat. And I thought possibly we might be able to do something, but there's some orbits that are colliding with some of those mega stars that are above my pay grade that I won't speak on. But 30 years, it goes by fast since that third championship, the three-peat. But I know those guys are all thinking about it, and we all wish each other well.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's just, that was what an incredible era of basketball. And again, even though you broke my heart, and we had a Cavs had a really good team back then, but there's no way we're going to get through you guys. We beat the Celtics the one year. We actually beat Bird for the last time in the playoffs in '92, and then played you guys. And we knew right then, it's over. I mean, I think everyone in Cleveland in their hearts knew we're not going to get past the Bulls. Just it is what it is. And you guys, every year was the same result. But I think I look back now, it was great. We were playing greatness, and it was, the start of a dynasty. And again, in my opinion, the greatest sports dynasty of my lifetime. So the fact that you were part of that, again, Scott, and you were a part of that. I mean, you were a big part of the first three-peat. It has to be pretty awesome for you. I mean, looking back on that and knowing that you'll always have that your legacy. Your basketball legacy is being part of the greatest dynasty in arguably sports history, modern sports history for sure.
Yeah, and that is special. I have one big hole in my basketball resume. I never experienced a Final Four and all those great North Carolina teams. Would have wanted to do that for Coach Smith. Some ways feel like we might have let the man down a couple of times when we had some really good ball clubs. But like I said, he didn't care about winning games. He wanted us to go on and be great people and achieve all of our aspirations and our dreams. And being in Chicago, being on those teams, winning those 3 championships kind of makes up for that a little bit.
Oh, yeah, it's got to. And a couple more questions for you, Scott. And again, I appreciate you taking the time to do this. One of them, and I have to ask this, I'm sure it's a cliche question you get all the time, but you played with LeBron, you played with MJ. I'm not going to ask you who you think is better, but what do you think the differences in their game are? And where do you put both of them in the stratosphere of basketball?
Well, they're both, like I said, I said they're both built different. They've been blessed by God different than all the other Hall of Famers that are at the top of the Hall of Fame. The one thing that I'll take away from my time with MJ and LeBron is that Michael didn't care if it was Tuesday and I always say Cleveland, but let's say Milwaukee this time.
Thank you.
On the 4th game of 5 nights, that last person sitting in that row that maybe I've never seen him before, only going to see him once this year come through town. He wanted them to know that they just witnessed the greatest basketball player to ever put on a pair of basketball shorts. And he did that every night in every arena, regardless of what the situation would be. He wanted to embarrass whoever they put in front of him, trying to stop him, whatever schemes they used, that when the player got in his car with his wife or significant other or brother, that they wouldn't even be able to look them in the eye to think that they were on the same caliber of a basketball player of who they just had to go and got beat by. They wanted the guy in the uniform to, when he put his head on the pillow and dreamt of beating Michael Jordan, he wouldn't even believe that he could do that in his sleep. That's how bad he wanted to put a both physical and mental beat down on his opponent. And LeBron didn't have that. LeBron wanted to win the game. However that case might have been, using one of his teammates, scoring points, rebounding, playing defense. He didn't care. He just wanted to win the game. He never wanted to affect somebody so badly the way Michael did.
That's a great comparison. Yeah, I think, when you watch MJ, I've never seen a competitor, never in any sport like MJ. And I've watched sports my whole life, Scott. I know a lot of professional athletes. I've never seen anybody. You look at other athletes in other sports. What logo do they wear? They wear Michael's logo. Think about that. All the other greats in other sports idolize MJ. So yeah, I've never seen anything quite like him. And again, I remember just fearing him as a kid, as a Cavs fan, just fearing him. He would just destroy us. And there was nothing we can do about it. We had Gerald Wilkins, some other guys, who Ron Harper back in the day, but he would just, nothing we did mattered. And MJ was, essentially, there was nobody at his level. And it was pretty obvious, I think, at the time. And there was a lot of great players back then. People forget all the great players in the 90s, Scott, that didn't, like I told you, didn't win championships because of MJ.
Yeah, I'll have to end it on this. My phone's blowing up over here, but the greatness of Michael Jordan might be his competitiveness. Let me back up. The greatness of Michael Jordan might be his confidence because of his competitiveness, because he has put in the work. He felt comfortable in any situation out on the floor against, like I say, any opponent, any scheme, however you're going to try to stop him, either the Pistons or Portland Trailblazers. It didn't matter to him. They put a cat, you mentioned him earlier, Dennis Hobson, in front of Michael, my rookie year, in front of Michael every day. We practiced starters against the subs. And unfortunately, Hop always had to go up against MJ. And Michael, like I said, this is pre-championship. This dude was not that guy in the last dance that let Rodman go off to Vegas with Carmen Electra in the middle of the season. That would not have flied when I played with him before he had his first ring. He might have been like, well, let me see how this plays out. And this guy might be able to help me get my 4th championship. That was a different MJ. The dude that didn't have a ring, Dennis Hopson had to face that guy every day. And you remember, Hops led Ohio State in scoring.
Yep.
His senior year, 30 points a game. He had scored about 18 to 16 a night for 4 years in New Jersey. But Michael just always wanted to go, just go at him physically, verbally, physically, knocking him down. Dennis, you were talking trash. Did you not get nothing that they did? We all called Dennis Hop. That was his nickname, not Michael. Michael called him Dennis. And I think in a way, he's like, you hadn't earned my respect enough for me to call you Hop yet. He didn't say it, but it was said in a way that we all knew it, because he would go at him so hard. And I think by the end of that year, Hop had one good day in practice, and we actually beat the starters. We had never beat the starters. And but it was right back to the same thing the next day. And by the end of that year, Hop couldn't play basketball the way he did in Ohio State, the way he did it in New Jersey. He took him out of who he was. He never let him get up off the mat for a breather. And it wasn't personal. The dude just had no chill. He just had that much intensity in everything that he did. They had to trade Hop a couple of games into the following year. And I loved Dennis. But it was the saddest thing that I ever saw in sports. And I think looking back at it, I wonder if Phil Jackson wishes that he would have had another 2-guard that he could have thrown in there in front of MJ, and instead of letting Hop take that abuse day after day.
Wow, I didn't know that. Scott, one quick question before you go. And I ask every guest this question. When you look back, 20, 25 years from now, when you look back at your whole life, career and personal life, what do you want people to know about the legacy of Scott Williams?
Well, it's not for me to decide, but in this fantasy situation, that I was an overachiever, that I achieved some things probably greater than my ability because of my hard work, persistence, and tenacity. And that'll be just fine with me.
I love it. It's simple yet straightforward answer. So I appreciate that. Scott, it's been such an honor having you on the show. I mean, again, I grew up watching you, so to be able to interview now is like a dream come true for me. I love interviewing all these former players, especially someone like you who I watched a lot as a kid. So again, thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed my time.
Of course. All right. Thanks, Scott. I'll be in touch. Okay. You too.